Hi, I'm Megan.
And I'm Frank. Megan and I are professors of philosophy at the University of Arkansas in Little Rock and co hosts of the podcast Philosophy on the Fringes. And our favorite thing to philosophize about is weird stuff.
You might think things like aliens, cryptids, ghosts, demons, or hypnosis are way too bizarre to be taken seriously by academic philosophers.
Or maybe you're a true believer and are excited to see your favorite urban legend getting some attention.
What we've learned studying and teaching philosophy over the years is that a lot of normal philosophical questions are just as strange and nebulous as questions about extraterrestrial life or near-death experiences.
And some of the strangest things in the world raise philosophical questions that have confounded thinkers for millennia, such as, what are moral rights and where do they come from? Does a God exist? Can we even be sure the external world exists? It turns out these ancient philosophical debates are crucial for investigating the weirdest wonders of the world.
Our lives are full of the strange, and those things that most confound us are often the topics that can benefit the most from rigorous philosophical reflection. These are the sorts of topics we cover in our podcast, and we've chosen some of our favorites just for this series.
The ancient Greek philosopher Aristotle once said that philosophy begins in wonder. We like to think that philosophy begins in wonder and confusion, and even sometimes in being creeped out. If you agree, this is the lecture series for you.
We're Doctors Megan Fritts
and Frank Cabrera,
and we hope you enjoy this Audible original. Lecture 1, Bigfoot and the Philosophy of the Strange. No doubt you've heard of Bigfoot. Alleged Bigfoot sightings have remained a persistent theme in the newspapers for decades. Perhaps you even know someone who claims to have seen him. Also referred to as Sasquatch, Bigfoot is supposed to be a kind of hairy, half-man, half-ape hybrid who walks upright and stalks the more remote regions of the United States, such as the Pacific Northwest or the Ohio River Valley. Around the world, we hear of sightings of similar creatures, such as the Yeti in Asia or the Yowie in Australia. The subject of Bigfoot can be approached from any number of angles. In this course, we aim to apply a philosophical lens to Bigfoot, as well as to near-death experiences, hypnosis, and other strange topics.
The word philosophy literally means the love of wisdom. But as a domain of study, philosophy can be regarded as a systematic and rational examination of our most fundamental concepts and assumptions. Some philosophical investigations concern questions about the ultimate nature of reality, including that of human beings. This branch of philosophy is referred to as metaphysics. One perennial metaphysical question is the problem of free will. We all assume that we can make genuine, voluntary choices. That's why humans hold each other morally accountable for their choices. However, scientific inquiry reveals a universe governed by unchangeable laws, the sorts of things described by our best physical theories. Our actions, like the behavior of subatomic particles, are determined by these laws of nature. But then, how is free will possible? Is our sense of acting freely just an illusion?
Some philosophical investigations concern the nature and scope of our knowledge. This branch of philosophy is referred to as epistemology. Ordinarily, we assume that we know many things about the world. I know that I have 2 hands, I know that the capital of France is Paris, and I know that Jupiter is the biggest planet in the solar system. But how do we gain knowledge? Is all knowledge acquired through the 5 senses, or are there other sources of knowledge, such as intuition or mystical experience? The 17th century French philosopher René Descartes wondered whether we can ever know anything at all, at least with certainty, given that reasons for doubt are never in short supply.
Still, other philosophical investigations concern how we ought to live. This is the branch of philosophy known as ethics. We all have our beliefs about what's morally right and morally wrong. To engage in ethical inquiry involves asking deeper questions about what makes some action right or wrong. Is morality simply determined by one's society or culture? Or are there universal objective moral truths? In studying ethics, we might also wish to know what is ultimately worthwhile about life. Is the point of living just to achieve personal happiness, or should we have higher aspirations than that?
Our investigation will intersect with all the main branches of philosophy we've just outlined. But as we hope to show, you can think philosophically about almost any topic, including the strange, eerie, and bizarre. In our view, whenever you ask foundational or big picture questions about any subject whatsoever, you are doing philosophy. Throughout our exploration of topics like Bigfoot, we intend to adopt an approach that is open minded but not credulous, skeptical yet not cynical. Our primary goal in this lecture is to introduce 3 helpful logical tools that are useful for debates about Bigfoot and can be applied to other strange topics as well.
Okay, let's get back to Bigfoot. Often, Bigfoot is treated as a proper noun, the assumption being that there is only one Bigfoot. However, according to professional Bigfoot enthusiasts, Bigfoot, properly speaking, is not an individual, but an animal species. Specifically, Bigfoot is thought to be a scientifically unrecognized hominid. In other words, Bigfoot belongs to the same taxonomic group, sometimes called the Great Apes, which includes gorillas, chimpanzees, orangutans, and us, human beings. Some even distinguish between different subspecies of Bigfoot, an eastern variety and a western variety, to account for variation in reported descriptions.
Culturally, Bigfoot is often classed with other cryptids, creatures such as the Loch Ness Monster, the Jersey Devil, and Mothman. Cryptids are mysterious creatures alleged by some to exist, but whose existence remains unsubstantiated, at least according to professional biologists. According to so-called cryptozoologists, many of these cryptids are supposed to have supernatural abilities or occult significance. For example, Mothman, a human-like insect that's anywhere from 6 to 10 feet tall, with large wings and piercing red eyes, is alleged to appear right before mass tragedies. Famously, in 1967, there were reported sightings of Mothman in Point Pleasant, West Virginia, right before the collapse of the Silver Bridge, in which 46 people died.
Although sometimes Bigfoot hunters attribute to him or her supernatural powers like invisibility or mind control, frequently Bigfoot is regarded as just another member of the animal kingdom. In the last 150 years or so, paleontologists have discovered several species of extinct hominids, close cousins of Homo sapiens. Some of these hominids, such as Australopithecus afarensis, which went extinct about 3 million years ago, had a mix of both ape-like and human-like features. Other hominid cousins, such as the Neanderthals, or Homo neanderthalis, which went extinct about 40,000 years ago, were very similar to Homo sapiens and even interbred with them. According to some believers, Bigfoot very well could be an isolated population of some ancient hominid species already identified by paleontologists, which we've wrongfully concluded to be extinct, a kind of evolutionary relic from the Stone Age.
Those who believe in Bigfoot usually do so either because they claim to have seen the creature with their own eyes or because of the eyewitness testimony of others. According to the Bigfoot Field Researchers Organization, founded in 1995, there have been over 75,000 reported Bigfoot sightings in the United States. However, the organization only considers about 5,000 to 6,000 of those reported sightings to be credible. The state with the most sightings is Washington, followed by sightings are by ordinary people with little apparent motive to deceive. Although some professional Bigfoot enthusiasts make money from book sales and documentaries, many people who claim to see him or her simply give their report and move on with their lives.
In some cases, people testify to having seen Bigfoot up close in optimal perceptual conditions. For example, in 2024, a police officer reported a close encounter with a creature that he could only describe as Bigfoot while hunting deer near Columbia, South Carolina. The figure, observed from about 20 yards away, was described as approximately 7 to 7.5 feet tall, brown, human-like in shape, with, quote, long brown hair, an ape-like face, and long arms, unquote. Even if you yourself have never had an encounter with Bigfoot, And even if you don't know anybody who has, one might reasonably believe that there must be something to all these reports. Surely, one might argue, not all these folks are lying or radically deceived about what they saw.
The skeptic might want to simply dismiss the testimony of people who claim to have seen Bigfoot, preferring to rely on hard scientific evidence. However, to navigate our modern complex society, we must, to a large degree, form our beliefs based on testimonial evidence. When your flight is delayed for maintenance and subsequently the flight crew assures you over the intercom that the problem has been fixed, you believe what they say based on testimony. When you go to the doctor and they offer you a diagnosis and prescribe certain medication, you typically believe what they tell you. There is an enormous amount of knowledge in the world, much of which requires specialized training to fully grasp. Given resource limitations and time constraints, no single person can become an expert in every subject. Consequently, we must, as a matter of practical necessity, rely on the testimony of others. If you were to be skeptical of everything that everyone else told you, refusing to believe anything unless you've seen it with your own eyes or proved it to yourself first, then it would be hard, maybe impossible, to get on with the demands of life.
But of course, sometimes we are skeptical of a testimonial report. For instance, if we have good reason to believe that a person giving an eyewitness testimony is being dishonest, or if we have good reason to doubt the person's competence, then we may reasonably discount their testimony. If you ever find yourself in a situation where I am the one giving you advice about how to repair your car, then you should immediately discount my testimony because I know next to nothing about how cars work. The 17th century English philosopher John Locke helpfully lays out several criteria for how to assess testimonial evidence in his influential book, An Essay Concerning Human Understanding.
According to Locke, in assessing the probability of a claim based on testimony, we should look at several factors. The number of witnesses, whether many people report having seen the same thing. The integrity of the witnesses, whether they are known to be of good moral character, particularly whether they're known to be honest. The skill of the witnesses, whether they actually have the capacity or expertise to know what they claim to know. The motives of the witnesses, whether they lack a hidden motive or incentive for providing their report. The consistency of the report, whether, for example, different parts of the testimony are internally coherent or contradictory. And contrary testimony, whether, for example, the testifiers disagree among themselves.
For Locke, a belief that one holds based on testimony is credible to the extent that it fulfills these criteria. If many people of integrity and competence with little incentive to deceive all provide consistent eyewitness reports with few or no reports to the contrary, then, other things being equal, probably their claims are true. Of course, we do not explicitly consider these criteria every time somebody tells us something. That would be tedious and time-consuming. Often, the process is more implicit. However, if someone tells us something that, on its surface, sounds surprising or even extraordinary, we may very well pause and consciously go through the kind of checklist that Locke describes before deciding whether to believe.
There is one other factor that Locke says we need to consider before deciding whether it's rational to believe a testimonial account. Whether the content of the report fits well with our background knowledge or past experience. To illustrate this last condition, Locke tells a story about a conversation between a Dutch ambassador and the king of Siam, or present-day Thailand. The ambassador told the king that in the winter, due to the extremely cold temperatures, some bodies of water become frozen solid. Incredibly, the ice becomes so thick that it could even support the weight of an elephant. The king responded with utter disbelief, stating, "Hitherto I have believed the strange things you have told me, because I look upon you as a sober, fair man, but now I am sure you lie."
As Locke suggests, the king's reaction to the ambassador's testimony was not at all unreasonable. Having lived his entire life in a tropical climate, the king could scarcely believe what the ambassador was telling him, even though up until that point, the Dutchman seemed competent and trustworthy. To be convinced of something so extraordinary, at least from the king's point of view, would require more than mere testimony. Perhaps only a trip to Holland in the winter would change the king's mind. Although the king was mistaken in this case, he was not being irrational. The story illustrates an important epistemological point, namely, we ought to consider whether a testimonial report is consistent with things we know before assenting to it.
With that said, one reason many scientists are skeptical of the existence of Bigfoot, despite so many eyewitness testimonies, is that the existence of such a creature does not fit well with our background knowledge. It is true that long ago, North America was home to non human primate species, but these were small animals closer to lemurs or monkeys. Due to changing climate, they went extinct about 30 million years ago. Primates would not show up again in North America until human beings crossed the land bridge from Asia and settled there. Thus, the Bigfoot hypothesis does not fit well with the fossil record.
To be sure, some accounts of Bigfoot's appearance seem to approximate the descriptions offered by paleontologists of some of those ancient hominid species we discussed earlier, such as Australopithecus afarensis. Although Australopithecus and related species possessed both ape-like and human-like features, they were generally much shorter than modern humans. In addition, there is no evidence that these ancient hominids ever migrated out of the African continent before going extinct a few million years ago. So, these ideas about Bigfoot do not fit well with what we know either.
Aside from eyewitness testimony, another source of evidence for the existence of Bigfoot is the various photographs and videos alleged to have captured the creature on camera. By far, the most famous footage of Bigfoot was taken in Northern California in the year 1967 by Roger Patterson and Bob Gimlin, who had set out to make a documentary on Bigfoot. The footage depicts a large, hairy, upright creature lumbering across rocky terrain, then briefly turning to the camera before walking off. Usually referred to as the Patterson-Gimlin film, this iconic video has been the subject of controversy for over 50 years. How should we think about this kind of video and photographic evidence?
To answer this question, let's consider a more mundane example. Suppose after arriving at your place of work in the morning, you place your lunch in the communal refrigerator. When lunchtime comes around, you open the fridge again and get an unpleasant surprise. Your lunch is missing. Here, there are multiple potential explanations. One possible explanation is that aliens from another galaxy swooped down to Earth for a moment, stole your lunch, and then left. Or maybe you suffered an inexplicable temporary bout of amnesia, during which time you completely forgot having eaten your lunch. These hypotheses, if true, would explain the absence of your lunch in the fridge. But of course, neither of these is the best explanation of your observations. The best explanation is probably that one of your coworkers consumed your lunch. So that's the hypothesis you opt for.
This pattern of reasoning is referred to by philosophers as inference to the best explanation, or IBE for short. According to IBE, when faced with some surprising set of facts, we should not simply believe the first explanation that comes to mind. Rather, we should consider all available potential explanations of those facts and choose the one that provides the best explanation. Whether one explanation is better than another is determined by a set of criteria called explanatory virtues. One commonly cited explanatory virtue is simplicity or parsimony, otherwise known as Occam's razor after the medieval philosopher who popularized the concept, the English friar William of Occam. According to Occam's razor, other things being equal, we ought to prefer the explanation that posits fewer entities or requires fewer assumptions.
In the previous example concerning your missing lunch, clearly the alien explanation is much less parsimonious, that is, much less simple, than the coworker explanation. Of course, if aliens did visit your office and take your lunch, that would explain its absence from the fridge. But this explanation requires positing aliens, which have not been independently verified, and it requires attributing to them rather bizarre motives. Why were they interested in your lunch, and only your lunch? The coworker explanation is much simpler, in the sense that it does not require positing the existence of any new entities. You already have independent reason to believe your coworkers exist, and lunchtime heists are far from unheard of in the workplace.
Other explanatory virtues besides parsimony include criteria such as precision. whether the explanation is specific and detailed. Internal consistency, whether the explanation is free from contradictions. Coherence with background knowledge, whether the explanation fits well with what we already know. And unification, whether the same explanation can be used to bring together diverse bodies of facts. Explanatory virtues are important because they provide a way to choose between competing explanations. Given any set of facts, there are always many distinct potential explanations. So we need some way to choose among them. If no explanation of the data is sufficiently good, or if there are multiple explanations that are equally explanatorily virtuous, it would be rational to suspend judgment. That is, we should remain agnostic about what the correct explanation is.
Returning to the Patterson-Gimlin film, skeptics will deny that the video demonstrates that Bigfoot exists. Rather, they put forward the alternative explanation that the video in the film is an elaborate hoax. The creature in the video is clearly just a person in a costume. While the makers of the film insisted till their deaths that the film was genuine, interestingly, several different people over the years have come forward claiming to have been the person in the Bigfoot suit. With respect to other videos, especially ones where the creature in the video looks blurry or can only be seen from very far away, the skeptic might adopt the alternative explanation that what is portrayed in the video could be something completely ordinary, like a large bear. Black bears, for instance, sometimes stand on their hind legs and can temporarily reach heights upwards of 7 feet. From a great distance, it is easy to mistake a large bear for Bigfoot, especially if one already has expectations that Bigfoot is maybe, probably, out there somewhere. In defense of their preferred alternative explanations, skeptics might cite the virtue of parsimony. The hoax explanation does not require positing the existence of a wholly new animal species. Rather, it relies only on entities that we already know to exist, namely humans, some of whom have a penchant for deception. A similar point holds for the bear explanation. Why postulate a novel, scientifically unrecognized species to explain some grainy video if you could just as easily explain it as being a large black bear? At the very least, if believers in Bigfoot have not definitively ruled out these alternative explanations, then they should withhold assent. It is not enough to come up with an explanation for what is depicted in videos, such as the Patterson-Gimlin film. One needs to show that the Bigfoot hypothesis is the best explanation, and that is no trivial task.
Still, many believers claim that the creature depicted in the film is none other than the legendary Bigfoot. They adopt, in other words, the Bigfoot explanation. They might argue, for instance, that the hoax explanation fails even to potentially account for the facts. Grover Krantz, one of the few professional anthropologists to accept the existence of Bigfoot, claimed that the Patterson-Gimlin film is likely genuine because the muscle tone of the creature looks too realistic to be faked, and the way the creature walks does not at all appear to be human. Proponents of the Bigfoot explanation might also attempt to cite some explanatory virtues of their own. First, they might point out that although their explanation does posit a new entity, namely Bigfoot, the explanation is not radically unparsimonious. As mentioned earlier, Bigfoot differs from many other cryptids like Mothman in that he or she is not supposed to be something supernatural or fantastical. For many believers, Bigfoot is just another member of the hominid family, some cousin of human beings like Australopithecus. So although Bigfoot would be some new entity, it would not be radically new in kind. Second, proponents of the Bigfoot explanation might try to cite unification as a virtue of their hypothesis. If Bigfoot exists, then that explains not just what is seen in the Patterson-Gimlin film and other videos, but also why so many people have claimed to have seen him or her. That is, it explains and unifies all the disparate eyewitness accounts.
It is fascinating that even after 50 years, discussion and analysis of the Patterson-Gimlin film persists to this day. Over the years, attempts have been made to recreate the scene depicted in the film, proving once and for all that it was a hoax. The idea being that if it is easy to make convincing footage of Bigfoot, then that should further undermine the evidential import of such videos. However, according to paleontologist Darren Neisch, such attempts to recreate the Patterson-Gimlin film have, quote, failed quite miserably, unquote. This assessment is notable since Naish is highly skeptical of the existence of Bigfoot. Our goal here has not been to definitively adjudicate the dispute over the Patterson-Gimlin film, or other videos alleged to have captured the elusive Bigfoot on camera, but rather to introduce a useful, logical framework in which to conduct such a debate. In assessing the Bigfoot hypothesis, or any strange phenomena, it is essential to consider multiple potential explanations and assess them by reference to explanatory virtues such as consistency, unification, and parsimony.
Let's turn now to our last logical tool for better understanding and engaging in debates over Bigfoot. One common argument against the existence of Bigfoot appeals to the principle absence of evidence is evidence of absence. We can find an instance of this argument in a 2016 article by the aforementioned paleontologist Darren Naish titled If Bigfoot Were Real. Sympathetic yet skeptical, Naish argues that absence of certain pieces of biological evidence counts strongly against the Bigfoot hypothesis. If Bigfoot were real, and just like any other animal, with no supernatural abilities, then it should leave many physical traces of its existence. To name a few things, there should be convincing tracks and footprints, DNA in the form of hair, blood, and droppings, and Bigfoot carcasses when the animal dies. Since there is a marked absence of these crucial biological traces, we have strong reason to deny Bigfoot's existence.
Now, of course, many believers dispute the claim that there is an absence of physical traces of Bigfoot. Some claim, for example, that we do have tracks that can only have been made by some creature that fits the description of Bigfoot. To adequately address such claims would take us too far afield, as it would require a technical discussion of ichnology, that is, the scientific study of tracks and traces. Suffice it to say, Bigfoot skeptics such as Naish point out that there is a near consensus among experts on animal tracks that all those put forward as belonging to Bigfoot have thus far been unconvincing or fraudulent. In another case, alleged Bigfoot DNA, when sequenced, was found to belong to an extinct species of polar bear.
Suppose, though, for the sake of argument, that there is an absence of physical traces of Bigfoot's existence. Can we infer from this that Bigfoot does not exist? To what extent is the underlying principle, absence of evidence is evidence of absence, true? To answer these questions, let's consider a different scenario. Suppose you hear that two animals have escaped from the zoo right next to your house. The Pacific pocket mouse, the smallest mouse in North America, and an adult lion. For obvious reasons, you want to make sure that neither creature has taken up residence in your home, so you briefly look inside each room, open all the closets, and peek under the bed. You see no sign of either animal, so you conclude that neither the mouse nor the lion is in your house. Although there is an absence of evidence for both animals, you are much more justified in believing the lion is not in your house than in believing the mouse is not in your house. If an adult lion were hiding in your home, you would surely see or hear it, in even the briefest of searches. Here, the absence of evidence for the lion really is strong, perhaps decisive evidence of its absence. However, things are different with the mouse. The Pacific pocket mouse is, excluding its tail, the size of an adult human's thumbprint. Since it is so small, you shouldn't expect to see it after only a cursory search of your house. It could be hidden inside your wall, for all you know. Here, the absence of evidence provides little to no additional evidence of its absence.
So, whether absence of evidence provides strong evidence of absence depends on several factors. First is how thorough and exhaustive the search was. Other things being equal, longer searches that cover more area provide more evidence against the existence of some disputed entity than less careful searches. Second is whether the methods one uses in one's search are adequate to the task. In the case of the escaped lion, ordinary sense perception is a sufficiently reliable method for ruling out its presence in your house. When it comes to the Pacific pocket mouse, however, a brief search with just your five senses proves wholly inadequate. A better method would be to employ infrared imaging techniques, a strategy sometimes employed by pest control. As a living creature, it gives off heat signatures, which can be detected with the proper equipment and training. If you still fail to find evidence of any mice in your house after a thorough investigation using infrared cameras, then that would provide very strong evidence for their absence. So then, in evaluating the argument from absence of evidence, we need to consider whether the search for Bigfoot has been sufficiently long, diligent, and effective. Talk of creatures such as Bigfoot goes back hundreds of years. However, the modern search for Bigfoot is about 60 years old. Is this a long enough time to conclude, in the absence of physical traces, that Bigfoot does not exist? One common argument that we have increasingly heard is that there is a concerning absence of convincing video footage. In 1967, perhaps it was not so puzzling to find little documentary evidence of Bigfoot. But nowadays, nearly everyone carries around a high quality video camera in their pocket in the form of a smartphone. We thus collectively have very effective methods for gathering evidence of Bigfoot, were he to exist. The lack of convincing smartphone videos can be thought of as further strengthening the absence of evidence problem.
However, for those Bigfoot fans out there, we'll close with an anecdote that offers a glimmer of hope. In a 2021 interview with GQ magazine, the zoologist Jane Goodall, a world-renowned expert on chimpanzees, expressed openness to the possibility of Bigfoot. She tells a story of her visit to one of the most remote regions of Ecuador. She had her interpreter ask the villagers whether they had ever seen a monkey without a tail. 3 hunters agreed. "Oh yes, we've seen monkeys without tails. They walk upright and they're about 6 foot tall." These villagers, who presumably know nothing about the extensive cultural mythos surrounding Bigfoot, are the reason that Goodall claims that she's not ready to definitively rule out Bigfoot. What should we make of Goodall's anecdote? We hope we've provided you with some logical tools to begin to answer this question.
Lecture 2, The Extraterrestrial Life Debate. Have you ever looked up into the great expanse of the night sky and wondered, are we alone? Human beings, throughout history, have entertained the possibility of intelligent life elsewhere in the cosmos. In the ancient world, for example, a 2nd century Greek thinker named Plutarch, best known for his biographies of famous Greeks and Romans, composed a dialogue in which he considers various astronomical questions about the moon. One of those questions includes whether the moon's climate is too arid or its rotation too quick to allow for the possibility of intelligent life. But perhaps the most rationally compelling argument from antiquity concerning the possibility of intelligent life elsewhere in the universe comes from the Greek philosopher Epicurus, who lived from 341 to 270 BC.
Epicurus developed a complex philosophical system, including an account of the fundamental nature of reality, how it is that humans acquire knowledge, and how we ought to live our lives. One of his core commitments was to a kind of materialistic atomism. According to Epicurus, everything in the universe is material and composed of an infinite number of tiny particles moving through the void in space. These tiny particles he called atoms, a word in ancient Greek that means literally uncuttable. Because of their weight, he believed, atoms naturally move downward, but they also sometimes swerve randomly. In Epicurus's world picture, there is no such thing as an immaterial soul, and even the gods, who play little to no role in human affairs, are composed of matter.
Most importantly, for our purposes, Epicurus also argued that the universe is eternal and infinite in extent. And according to him, that meant, quote, "There are infinite worlds, both like and unlike this world of ours," unquote. He then says, we must believe that in all worlds there are living creatures and plants and other things we see in this world. The idea is that in a universe that is eternal and infinitely large, we should expect as a matter of logical necessity that every possible combination of atoms has already come into being, and will come into being again, an infinite number of times over. So, somewhere out there, at distances that are difficult for the mind to comprehend, it is logically guaranteed that there are other intelligent beings. And since in that infinite, eternal universe, all possible combinations must come to pass, we should expect some of these intelligent beings to be humanoid, though of course some will look very different from us. Ancient Greek philosophers such as Democritus and Leucippus, atomists who came before Epicurus, and the Roman poet Lucretius, who lived a few hundred years after, all held similar perspectives on the question of extraterrestrial life.
However, not all ancient Greek philosophers were as optimistic about the possibility. The two most prominent Greek philosophers, Plato and Aristotle, both opposed the idea of a plurality of worlds all containing intelligent life. Aristotle's objections mostly stemmed from his disagreement with the tenets of atomism, objecting to, for instance, the idea of a void, completely empty space. Furthermore, Aristotle believed that all earthly matter is by nature drawn to the center of the universe, where our Earth resides. Any distant, potentially life-permitting planet would be physically unstable, its matter being inexorably drawn to the Earth's center, its so-called natural place. Plato briefly considers the question of alien life in a dialogue called the Timaeus. In it, he suggests the world and all its constituents were created by a god called the Demiurge, who gave order to a pre-existing formless matter in accordance with an ideal and rational plan. Plato claims at one point that the uniqueness of the creator implies a unique creation, ruling out the possibility of other worlds with intelligent life. This idea of Plato's would prove influential during the medieval period of philosophy and beyond. Many figures, such as the 13th century Catholic philosopher-theologian Thomas Aquinas, would reject the idea of extraterrestrial life, partly based on the idea that God's creation of life on Earth was a special and unique event, not to be repeated elsewhere.
However, it should be mentioned that not everyone who believes the world was created by God has regarded alien life to be incompatible with their worldview. In fact, some have argued that belief in a creator God positively supports the idea of life elsewhere in the universe. If the cosmos was created by some all-powerful divine intelligence, such as a god or multiple gods, then we should naturally expect it to show preference toward creatures such as itself. A creator god would certainly want to fill the universe with rational and intelligent creatures. Why else would that god take the time to form so many other celestial bodies, if not to populate them with intelligent life? So, on that view, we should regard it as highly unlikely that Earth is unique in being the abode of intelligent life.
One thinker who was very much inspired by something like this theological argument was the distinguished astronomer William Herschel, who lived from 1738 to 1822. Herschel was most famous during his time for building the best telescopes in the world and for discovering the planet Uranus. Like many of his contemporaries, Herschel was convinced, partly for theological reasons, that ours was a universe teeming with life. So convinced that he conjectured that all the other celestial bodies in our solar system contained life, including the moon and even the sun. Such beings, Herschel speculated, would have organs, quote, adapted to the peculiar circumstances of that vast globe, unquote.
Thanks to several centuries of scientific advancement and the painstaking efforts of scientists and technicians, we now know a lot more about the universe than our predecessors did. We know, of course, that Herschel's conjecture that the sun and the moon are inhabited by intelligent beings is mistaken. A gaseous ball of plasma with an average surface temperature of 10,000 degrees Fahrenheit, the sun is far too hostile an environment to harbor life. And while some astronomers speculate that there may have once been microbial life on the moon, thus far there is no compelling evidence for this claim.
Still, a modern descendant of the Epicurean argument for extraterrestrial intelligence remains prominent today. Although the universe is not infinite with respect to time and space, as some of the ancient philosophers thought, our best scientific theories hold that the universe is very old and very big. Big Bang cosmology holds that the universe began about 13.8 billion years ago, as all matter, energy, and even space itself rapidly expanded from an infinitesimal point. According to astronomers, the observable universe spans 93 billion light-years in diameter, with one light-year being about 5.88 trillion miles. Within this extensive space, there exists a mind boggling number of stars. Our own Milky Way, an average sized galaxy, contains about 100 billion stars, and it has been estimated that there may be as many as 2 trillion other galaxies. Astronomers have already identified over 5,000 exoplanets, that is, planets orbiting other stars outside our solar system.
Surely, with so many stars and planets, it would be astoundingly improbable for our Earth to be the only place that harbored intelligent life. To insist otherwise, one might think, amounts to a kind of terrestrial arrogance. After all, although it is our home, there is nothing cosmically special about the Earth. It is not the center of the universe, as Aristotle believed. To quote the great astronomer and science popularizer, Carl Sagan, the Earth is a mote of dust suspended in a sunbeam, at least from the cosmological point of view. According to this probabilistic version of Epicurus's old argument, it is a near certainty that on some distant planet orbiting a distant star in a distant galaxy, there are intelligent beings also staring out into the universe contemplating existence. Yet, this statistical argument, in some sense, raises more questions than it answers. If the universe likely contains other extraterrestrial intelligence simply as a matter of statistics, this raises a further puzzle. Where is everybody? This is a question that the Italian physicist Enrico Fermi asked some colleagues at lunch one day in the summer of 1950. Why haven't these extraterrestrials visited Earth? Why haven't they tried to contact us? Why is there no trace at all of their existence, past or present? This last question is known as the Fermi paradox.
Now, of course, some people think that aliens have visited Earth. There are untold numbers of UFO sightings from the 20th century, and some people even claim to have been abducted by aliens. In the last few years, there has been a resurgence of interest in UFO sightings. So much so that congressional hearings were held in Washington, D.C. concerning such claims, at which some former members of the military even testified that the U.S. government is in possession of alien spacecraft. But for those who are skeptical of such reports, how should we explain the fact that the universe seems so suspiciously quiet? One explanation immediately comes to mind. Although intelligent extraterrestrials probably exist somewhere else out there, one might argue that the distances are simply too great for them to reach us or even to make contact. The closest star to Earth, besides our Sun, is Proxima Centauri, which lies about 4.25 light years away. With our current technology, it would take tens of thousands of years for a space shuttle to reach Proxima Centauri. Odds are we should not expect the closest star to ours to also harbor intelligent life, so it's highly likely that the nearest extraterrestrial civilization lies somewhere even more prohibitively distant. So, in short, we see no evidence of aliens because they're too far away. Fermi paradox solved.
However, there are two problems with this proposed solution. First, the explanation assumes that aliens have similar levels of technology to us. But this assumption seems unjustified given what we know about the average age of terrestrial planets in our galaxy. The Earth is about 4.5 billion years old, but it is far from the oldest planet in the Milky Way. According to estimates, the median age of Earth-like planets in our galaxy is about 6.4 billion years, and some of the oldest terrestrial planets are about 9 billion years old. This is significant because it means that, comparatively speaking, the Earth is a fairly young planet. Assuming that life and intelligence evolve at roughly the same rate as they did on Earth, then potentially there are alien civilizations in our galaxy that are roughly 2 billion years older than ours. Surely this is more than enough time to develop advanced technology to deal with the problem of interstellar travel. Let's make the modest assumption that an advanced alien civilization has only managed to create ships that go 1% the speed of light. Well, since the Milky Way is only 100,000 light years across, it would only take 10 million years to traverse the entire galaxy. Since there may be alien civilizations out there that are 2 billion years older than ours, surely the Earth should have been visited or even colonized by now. Again, Fermi's question arises: where is everybody?
The second problem with the "they're too far away" explanation is that the Fermi paradox questions why we see no evidence whatsoever of alien activity of any kind. Perhaps it would be too impractical for even advanced alien civilizations to send manned missions to distant planets, since presumably they too are vulnerable to aging and death. But surely an advanced civilization would want to send out probes to explore the universe, perhaps with the ultimate aim of colonizing the galaxy slowly over time, planet by planet. We won't be able to solve Fermi's paradox quite so easily then. Although sometimes the problem is not taken very seriously by professionals, as the astronomer and philosopher Milan Cierkiewicz remarks in his book The Great Silence, the Fermi paradox is, quote, the most complex multidisciplinary problem in contemporary science, unquote. This is primarily because to solve the Fermi paradox, we may need to give up some deeply held belief about ourselves, the nature of science, or our conception of the way the world works.
As Cierkiewicz points out, Fermi's puzzle is not just a difficult astronomical question, like how black holes really work. Rather, Fermi's question is a true paradox. One common understanding of a paradox is that it is a set of statements, each of which, when looked at individually, seems highly plausible, but when considered together are logically inconsistent. Paradoxes can be troubling because we may wish to hold on to each statement viewed in isolation, but we realize upon reflection that we cannot, because each statement contradicts at least one other. Once we identify a paradox, rationality demands that we perform some intellectual maintenance on our system of beliefs to restore logical consistency. We must either reject one of the statements generating the paradox, thereby potentially giving up some cherished belief, or we must show why it only seems as though the statements are logically inconsistent. Philosophers love paradoxes because they require that we think hard about and maybe even revise our fundamental assumptions about the world.
According to Cierkiewicz, there are several philosophical assumptions that underlie Fermi's paradox, many of which are presuppositions of modern science. The first is a principle we call realism. According to realism, there exists a world of objects outside our minds, things like stars and planets, plants and animals, with properties like mass and size which take up space and exist within time. We construct theories about the nature of these objects based on sense perception and reason. Although our senses sometimes mislead us, and sometimes we make logical mistakes, according to realism, we are not massively and systematically deceived about the way the world is. The French philosopher René Descartes famously challenged realism with a thought experiment. He wondered, what if there were some evil demon, a godlike figure with malicious intentions, who made it seem to us like external objects exist outside our minds? What if what we call reality is just a figment of our imagination? Descartes and later philosophers have struggled to solve this fundamental skeptical problem and prove that we can know with certainty that our senses are generally reliable. But regardless of whether we have an answer to this extreme form of skepticism, we still presuppose something like realism in both science and ordinary life.
One potential solution to the Fermi paradox, which would require giving up realism, is the idea that we live in a computer simulation. Some philosophers, and even some physicists, have independently defended this idea for various reasons. According to the simulation hypothesis, our reality is, at bottom, created and overseen by an extraterrestrial intelligence that exists in some higher dimensional plane. Objects around us are not really composed of physical particles, but rather bits of information, zeros and ones. Just as characters in a video game cannot reach out and interact with the real world, being confined solely to the simulated environment generated by the game's computer code, so too are we confined to the simulated environment created by an extraterrestrial intelligence. Perhaps these extraterrestrials could, if they liked, make themselves known to us, but for some reason they have yet to do so, and that is why the universe is so silent.
The second assumption underlying the Fermi paradox is called naturalism. According to naturalism, we ought not to invoke supernatural entities or causes in scientific explanations. This version of naturalism is methodological. It is a prescription for how we ought to do science. Note that to assume naturalism is not to say that there are no supernatural causes or events, or that it is never rational to believe in the supernatural. Although the Fermi paradox has philosophical dimensions, it should be regarded as a scientific problem. And if it is a scientific problem, then our answer to the question, where is everybody, should not, if we accept naturalism, invoke supernatural entities or causes.
Of course, it's always possible to reject naturalism. Doing so opens the door to yet another possible solution to the Fermi paradox. Someone who believes that the universe was created by an all knowing, all powerful, all good God has a readily available explanation for why we have not observed any signs of other intelligent life in the universe. They could say that the reason why our galactic neighborhood is so quiet is that humanity was specially created by God to be the only intelligent species in the physical universe. According to the 19th century historian and philosopher of science, William Whewell, the earth and its inhabitants are under the care of God in a special manner, and we are utterly destitute of any reason for believing that other planets and other systems are under the care of God in the same manner. Someone like Whewell might even use the absence of signs of intelligent extraterrestrial life as a kind of argument for the existence of God. Based on everything else we know, we should have observed signs of extraterrestrial intelligence, but we have not. The best explanation, or so the argument goes, is that humanity is cosmically special, being the unique product of some divine plan.
This solution to the Fermi paradox, of course, entails rejecting naturalism, and so probably will not appeal to most working scientists. Methodological naturalism is a near universal assumption of modern science, and this is no accident. The assumption that natural events have natural causes has historically proven extraordinarily fruitful in advancing our understanding of the world. Scientists also prize things like empirical testability and the ability to formulate invariant laws of nature. But one problem with supernatural entities is that they seem empirically untestable and are, by definition, not constrained by the laws of nature.
The next two assumptions that generate the Fermi paradox are more specific in nature than the previous two. The first is called gradualism, which states that, other things being equal, we should not postulate discrete, sweeping, catastrophic events to explain the large-scale development of the universe. This is not to say that such events never occur. The Big Bang, after all, was a single, discrete, catastrophic event. But according to gradualism, other things being equal, we should try to explain our universe in terms of the gradual working out of familiar forces and processes. This assumption of gradualism played an important role in the history of Earth science when 19th century geologists started explaining the Earth's features in terms of slow, gradual processes such as erosion and glaciation, rather than quick, dramatic, and destructive processes such as great floods or supervolcanoes.
To dissolve the Fermi paradox, one might be tempted to deny gradualism by postulating that in the distant past, a discrete, extremely destructive mass extinction event wiped out all complex life in the galaxy. Maybe this catastrophic mass extinction event, the equivalent of a galactic-sized nuclear bomb, prevented the intelligent life that once existed elsewhere from having the time to develop the technology to colonize the galaxy. Or perhaps there once was a generation of extremely advanced alien civilizations that colonized the Milky Way, but all traces of them have been wiped out. Right now, conditions in the galaxy are roughly stable, and so life here on Earth and elsewhere has had the chance to evolve intelligence. But right now, there is no alien civilization with sufficiently advanced technology to make its presence known to us. What might have caused these catastrophic mass extinction events? Some proponents of this solution to the Fermi paradox cite gamma-ray bursts as a potential candidate. These are intense explosions of incredibly energetic electromagnetic radiation that occur sometimes during the supernova of a star. If such an explosion occurred near Earth, it would deplete the ozone layer in the atmosphere, exposing the biosphere to harmful levels of radiation that even the hardiest microorganisms could scarcely withstand. The downside of this solution is that right now it is a bit speculative and perhaps a little bit too convenient. One might worry that this catastrophist solution to the Fermi paradox is ad hoc, simply assuming an explanatory mechanism without independent evidence. On the other hand, the hypothesis that the galaxy was once subject to very large, frequent gamma-ray bursts is at least empirically testable.
The next assumption underlying the Fermi paradox is called Copernicanism, which states that there is nothing special about our Earth, the solar system, or even our galaxy. In short, we are perfectly ordinary from the standpoint of the universe. As the name suggests, this principle ultimately derives from the 16th century astronomer Nicholas Copernicus, who placed the sun at the center of the solar system. Although it's a common sense idea now, Copernicus went against centuries of astronomical tradition dating back to Aristotle, who, as you'll remember, held that the Earth was the center of the universe and that every other celestial body, the planets, the sun, and the stars, all revolve around the Earth. Since Earth actually is perfectly ordinary in the grand scheme of things, we should expect there to be planets out there in our galaxy similar to Earth, with a similar history, including the evolution of intelligent life. The Epicurus inspired probabilistic argument for the existence of extraterrestrial intelligence seems to presuppose this Copernican principle.
One popular solution to the Fermi paradox denies Copernicanism, insisting that the Earth is, statistically speaking, very special. According to the rare Earth hypothesis, there are many independent, extremely improbable conditions that all need to be in place for a planet to be similar enough to our Earth to support life. And because of that, Earth-like planets are extraordinarily rare in our galaxy. Contrary to what Copernicanism suggests, our Earth has many special features that play a role in making the evolution of complex life possible. For one, it has a moon roughly a quarter of its size, which plays a role in stabilizing the axis of the Earth, allowing for the stable cycle of seasons with which we are all familiar. Because of Earth's distance from the sun, it has the perfect temperature for liquid water, commonly thought to be necessary for life. Also of importance is the proximity of the planet Jupiter. Some have suggested that because of Jupiter's size, it acts like a cosmic bodyguard, attracting debris which might otherwise bombard the Earth, wiping out all life. These are just a few of the highly contingent features that ensure our planet's stability. Maybe simple microbial life is fairly common in the galaxy, but according to proponents of the rare Earth hypothesis, because there are so many improbable conditions that need to be just right for complex life to evolve, we should expect only a handful of genuinely Earth-like planets in the entire galaxy. Because there are so few genuinely Earth-like planets in the galaxy, it is no surprise that the galaxy is not teeming with intelligent extraterrestrial life.
According to Chirkovich, the rare Earth hypothesis has become somewhat of a default position in astrobiological circles. But one cost of this solution is that it means letting go of the Copernican assumption, which has proved very fruitful throughout the history of science. Perhaps we should be wary of giving it up. Another concern is that if it's so extremely improbable that complex intelligent life will evolve, how did we get so lucky? Of course, conditions need to be such that complex life is possible, otherwise we would not be having this conversation. Some might be inclined to say that we simply won the cosmic lottery. If you win the lottery in real life, then you don't need a special explanation to account for your win. Somebody had to win, and by luck, it happened to be you. Others unsatisfied with the idea of simply accepting so improbable a coincidence might think that the existence of intelligent life, us, points to a cosmic designer. Interestingly, then, rejecting Copernicanism also intersects with some religious ideas.
The last set of assumptions concerns the abilities, motives, and values of intelligent extraterrestrials. For the Fermi paradox to get off the ground, we must assume that they would be able to and would want to make their presence known to us, probably by sending out exploratory expeditions or reconnaissance probes. Of course, one might simply deny these assumptions. Such a denial leads to some of the more popular and imaginative solutions to the Fermi paradox. One idea is that the Earth is, from the point of view of advanced alien civilizations, a kind of zoo or nature preserve. According to this idea, these civilizations have all signed an agreement to conceal their presence from us, perhaps until we reach the requisite level of technological advancement or moral development for them to make contact.
Another solution supposes that all advanced alien civilizations are risk-averse, viewing other planetary civilizations as an existential threat. Thus, they prefer to keep their distance from us. Still, another possible solution is that all alien civilizations eventually destroy themselves before developing the technology necessary for interstellar travel. This solution was extremely popular during the Cold War, when nuclear tensions were at their height. Or perhaps advanced civilizations lose interest in space travel once developing, say, irresistible sources of entertainment, such as advanced virtual reality. It's somewhat dismal to surmise that there may exist scores of intelligent extraterrestrials scattered throughout our galaxy, all languishing away in artificial worlds, choosing illusory bliss over the real achievement of interstellar exploration.
Many of these solutions, while fun to contemplate, seem, in a way, unsatisfactory. For one thing, as Carl Sagan and William I. Newman once wrote, "It is curious that the solution to the problem, 'Where are they?' depends powerfully on the politics and ethics of advanced societies." Additionally, not only do these solutions make a number of assumptions about the cultural practices of alien civilizations, but they also assume a kind of unwarranted homogeneity. Why think all alien civilizations are warlike and self-destructive? Why assume they are all timid? Why believe all of them prize hedonistic pleasure over galactic explorations? Surely, if many advanced civilizations exist, their cultures, politics, and ethical beliefs are all radically different. Surely at least one would be able to and desire to make contact with us.
Now, even if an alien civilization wanted to communicate with us and was able to send communication that would reach us, the success of these endeavors would depend on our ability to recognize their efforts as communication. But would we? In his influential work, Philosophical Investigations, the 20th century Austrian philosopher Ludwig Wittgenstein famously wrote, "If a lion could speak, we would not be able to understand him." By this, Wittgenstein meant that even if we could perfectly translate between lion speak and our native tongue, what the lion said wouldn't make much sense to us because humans and lions have such deeply different experiences of life in the world. What if the same were true of alien civilizations? In that case, communication efforts may be right under our noses, utterly undetected by us, as we are simply unable to understand it as communication.
Ultimately, the Fermi paradox has no easy answer. When we reflect on the problem for too long, the great silence starts to become a bit eerie. What do you think? Are we really all alone in the universe?
Lecture 3: What explains near-death experiences? The ancient Greek philosopher Plato ends his most influential work, The Republic, a dialogue on the nature of justice, with a curious tale known as the myth of According to Plato, was a soldier who was believed to have died in battle. On the day that he was supposed to be placed on the funeral pyre, he awoke and began to regale his companions about, quote, what he had seen in the world beyond, unquote. He said that his soul left him and traveled to a wondrous place where celestial entities, gods or demigods, presided in judgment over human beings. These judges ordered those who lived a righteous life to ascend upward to heaven, and those who lived a wicked life to descend downward to the underworld. Afterwards, the judges send back to the realm of the living to inform everyone of what awaits in the afterlife.
The myth of is one of the first examples in the historical record of a near-death experience, or NDE for short. A person who has an NDE first undergoes some life-threatening event, such as cardiac arrest or a stroke, whereby the vital functions are temporarily lost. However, after normal functioning is restored through medical intervention, the person reports having undergone an extraordinary experience. Although no two NDEs are alike, the psychiatrist Raymond Moody, who coined the term near-death experience, singled out several shared features of NDEs in his 1975 best-selling book, Life After Life. These features include floating free from one's body and observing it from above, moving through a tunnel toward a bright light, feelings of love, peace, and acceptance, an encounter with spirit beings or long-dead relatives, a life review where actions from the distant past are judged, a hesitance to come back to ordinary waking life, but, overall, an experience of being positively transformed with a renewed sense of purpose or appreciation for life.
Several of these characteristics are likely familiar due to the presence of NDEs in popular media. At this point, the idea that people see a bright light and have their life flash before their eyes right before death has become something of a cliche. However, NDEs are not just something that appear in movies and TV shows. According to most estimates, the prevalence of NDEs in the general population is 5 to 10%, and considered to be even higher in patients undergoing critical care, between 10 and 20%. NDEs have been reported by people from across a wide range of demographic and socioeconomic backgrounds. All told, this amounts to millions of people who have reported having experienced a distinctive, altered state of consciousness while dying. People all over the world experience NDEs, but there is some
Keep listening to this audiobook. I've left you a link in the description so you can do it, at no cost thanks to Audible's 30-day free trial.